My name is Dr. Nathaniel Crest, and I am a recently suspended medical historian with the Northwest Institute of Abandoned Facilities Research. The morning my suspension letter arrived, signed with a half-hearted apology and a full paragraph about policy violations, I made the worst decision of my professional life. I drove straight to the old Briarwood Memorial Hospital, the one we were ordered never to enter without a full team. I told myself it was a matter of pride, that I needed to confirm one last thing before accepting defeat, but if I'm being honest, it was ego. It was frustration. It was the stubborn confidence that, after 23 years studying derelict medical structures, nothing inside a decaying building could truly surprise me. The sun hadn't fully risen when I reached the property. The hospital sat in a shallow valley surrounded by bare trees whose branches tangled overhead like nerves in a ruptured brain scan. Briarwood's brick facade was unevenly collapsed, with windows boarded from decades of legal battles and neighborhood complaints. I had been here twice before, but only with a supervisor. Even then, we didn't go past the ground floor. The basement had been sealed off, unstable, they said, flooded in parts, risk of black mold, chemical contamination, structural collapse. Excuses that sounded rational until you realized the hospital had been abandoned in 1987, and yet, according to several night shift security reports, voices were heard below ground well into the early 2000s. I crossed the property with my equipment bag snug against my shoulder. I brought only a flashlight, a utility knife, a handheld oxygen monitor, a tape recorder, and a single thermos of coffee I'd already regretted brewing too weak. The foyer door was already cracked open. Last time, it had been padlocked. I paused in the doorway, waiting for the instinctive jolt of caution that normally hits me like a reflex, but nothing came. Just a faint drifting smell of rust and damp concrete. Old building smells familiar, almost comforting. Inside, the air was colder. Paper still littered the floor, curled from moisture. A metal gurney lay on its side, one wheel squeaking intermittently as the draft nudged it. I passed the old reception desk. A swath of yellow paint peeled like dead skin across the wall behind it, revealing the green layer beneath, then gray plaster. The deeper I walked, the dustier it became, as though the building exhaled around me. My goal, the door to the basement level, sat at the end of the eastern corridor. I knew exactly where it was, third door on the left, beside a faded sign that used to read mechanical access only. The problem was, the door had been barred shut since before I was born. The Institute had photographs proving it. The first time we came here, my supervisor, a man obsessed with protocols, made me take pictures of the corroded steel crossbar before we left, as if to emphasize, see? We don't go down there. But today, as I reached it, the crossbar was gone. Not removed, gone. The bolt housings were empty, their rust markings cleanly ending where the bar should have lain. No debris on the floor. No snapped metal shards. No dust patterns disturbed. It looked like the bar had never existed in the first place. A quiet, intrusive unease crept up the back of my neck. I told myself someone must have cut it away recently, though the neat emptiness of those bolt sockets didn't match any removal method I'd encountered in decades of fieldwork. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with my boot. The stairwell dropped into darkness, colder than the hallway and thick with the kind of silence that feels weighted. My flashlight beam quivered a little, a betrayal of the hand holding it. I clicked on my tape recorder. Basement entry, I whispered, partly for documentation, partly for the odd reassurance of hearing my own voice. Not structurally barred. Proceeding with caution. The stairs creaked under me, but not in the way rotten wood does. These were concrete steps, and yet they groaned like something under strain. Halfway down, the air changed damp at first, then strangely stale, as though it hadn't circulated in days. My oxygen monitor remained steady, so at least the atmosphere wasn't immediately hazardous. Still, I felt a faint pressure in my ears with every step deeper, like descending in an airplane. At the bottom, my flashlight swept across a wide corridor leading deeper into the hospital's underbelly. My previous visits ended above ground, so everything here was unfamiliar except for architectural conventions, exposed pipes overhead, a pair of old conduits running along the right wall, and smeared water stains marking past floods. The floor was surprisingly dry now. Dust coated everything except for one thing, footprints. I knelt, running my fingers lightly over one of the prints. The dust wasn't disturbed randomly. It was compressed neatly, heel to toe, leading down the corridor. Someone had been here recently, and the gait pattern suggested they weren't wandering, they were moving with purpose. Normally, I would retreat at that sign alone. Unauthorized personnel, squatters, drug processors, those are far more dangerous in derelict sites than asbestos could ever be. But the prints were odd. Each step was perfectly aligned, the stride consistent to an almost artificial degree. People don't walk like that, especially not in poorly lit basements. I followed the trail cautiously. My recorder crackled just once, like a breath brushing the microphone. I froze, rewound it, played it back. The noise came again, softer but unmistakable, an inhale. A human inhale. Except I hadn't breathed in at that moment. And the air around me was dead still. As I moved forward, the corridor opened into a larger room. The overhead lights were, of course, dead, but in the beam of my flashlight, I saw what must have once been a maintenance hub. Broken shelving units slumped against the far wall, their contents spilled decades ago. Rusted tools lay scattered, half swallowed by grime. But in the center of the room, illuminated in powdery clarity, stood a metal examination chair. One that absolutely should not exist in a maintenance basement. Straps dangled from its armrests. A trained 4-bag hung from the pole beside it. The chair faced away from me, angled toward a blank section of concrete wall as though whoever once sat in it had been forced to stare straight ahead. The footprints led directly to it. I circled slowly, keeping distance. When my flashlight passed over the front of the chair, my stomach knotted. Someone had carved a message into the metal seat, shallow but legible, the thin scratches forming a sentence so jagged it looked like the person's hands had been trembling violently. Don't look at it. My breath caught. I instinctively swung my flashlight behind me, half expecting something to be standing there. Nothing. No movement. No sound. But the moment I lowered the light, the oxygen monitor at my belt beeped. A brief, sharp warning. The oxygen levels had dropped by nearly 10% in a single second. Impossible. Unless something else in the room had displaced the air. I turned slowly, light trembling across concrete, pipes, dust, and then, in the corner opposite the chair, something shifted. Not a full movement, more like the suggestion of one. A shadow that wasn't mine. A shape that shouldn't have been there. I raised the flashlight. The beam flickered. Once. Twice. Then it steadied, landing on nothing. Only the wall. Whatever was down here, it was close. And I wasn't alone anymore. But the air had changed. I felt it. The kind of silent, electric tension an apex predator brings into a room before you even see it. The same instinct that makes deer freeze without knowing why. I stepped backward. The oxygen monitor beeped again. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until I felt my chest tighten, a sharp, uncomfortable pressure that snapped my attention inward just long enough for the flashlight to slip in my hand. The beam jittered across the floor and bounced off the metal legs of the examination chair. The scratches in the seat glinted faintly like tiny silver teeth. I forced myself to inhale slowly, quietly, even though every instinct screamed that the air itself wasn't safe anymore. The oxygen monitor chirped a third time, then steadied, and the quiet that followed seemed almost expectant. The shadow I thought I'd seen hadn't returned. Nothing moved at the edge of the beam. But the feeling hadn't changed. If anything, it had sharpened, as though the room had become aware of me. As though the moment I crossed into this basement, I'd stepped inside something else's awareness. I swallowed and aimed the light toward the corner again, checking every inch. Bare wall. Damp stain. No cracks big enough for an animal. Nothing that could explain a 10% oxygen displacement. I backed toward the corridor, my fingers brushing the door frame. The footprints leading to the chair, those disturbingly perfect steps, had not returned the other way. Whoever came to sit in that strapped, metal restraint either never left, or left without leaving tracks. I didn't want to know which. My recorder crackled again, louder this time, like someone brushing a palm over the microphone. The noise was distinctly human, too deliberate, too close. I lifted the device, my thumb trembling as I stopped the tape, rewound it several seconds, and pressed play. This time, I heard a voice. Not words. A breath forming the beginning of one, caught in the instant before speech, the way a person inhales sharply before saying your name in the dark. I gripped the recorder so tightly my knuckles ached. I should have left. I should have turned around, gone straight up those stairs, and called for law enforcement or a structural team or, God, even my supervisor. But instead, I found myself staring down the corridor, past the point where the footprints ended, at the hallway that stretched deeper into the basement, an area even our institute blueprints couldn't map due to incomplete documents. A soft, rhythmic tap sounded behind me. I spun, flashlight high. The examination chair swayed. Barely. Just enough that the straps brushed against the metal armrest with a faint rasp. There was no draft strong enough to move it. The air down here was still as stone. I clenched my jaw and stepped away quickly, practically stumbling into the hallway beyond. Every footstep felt too loud. Even the scrape of my shoe against the floor made me wince. The corridor led to a slight incline that dipped farther underground than I'd expected. The deeper I went, the cleaner the floor became, as if someone swept it regularly. Pipes overhead were newer, less corroded, and the concrete walls looked repaired, patched, repainted at some point long after the hospital had been shut down. That alone chilled me more than any shadow could have. Someone had been maintaining this place. The air temperature dropped several degrees as I reached the next landing. My breath puffed visibly in front of me. Moisture prickled on my arms. I shone the flashlight up. There was no venting system, no open ducts, nothing capable of producing cold airflow. A hallucination, perhaps, triggered by stress and low oxygen? No. I knew the signs. I'd been trained to recognize them. This was real. The corridor ended at a narrow metal door with a small wired glass window. The glass was coated in grime, but something faint glowed on the other side of it. A cold light, bluish, steady. Nothing like a flashlight beam. More like an operating room lamp, except far dimmer. I wiped a circle into the grime with my sleeve and peered through. A room stretched beyond the door, long and rectangular, lined with old file cabinets, overturned carts, and cardboard boxes collapsing under their own lot. But the light wasn't coming from any lamp. It radiated from the old hospital intercom speaker mounted high in the far corner, its mesh face dull metal but haloed with a faint electric flicker. The intercom shouldn't have had power. The entire hospital was off-grid, and there were no active generators on record. Yet the speaker buzzed softly, humming with a static glow. I pressed my ear against the glass. There was sound so faint I almost mistook it for tinnitus. A soft, continuous murmur. A voice. Multiple voices. Layered and whispering in overlapping tones, so quiet they almost blended into a single, wavering note, like someone playing the world's most unsettling chord on an out-of-tune organ. I stepped back, heart hammering. The only reason an intercom would be wired into a basement sublevel was if it connected to a monitoring room or inpatient ward. But Briarwood's basement wasn't built like that. It wasn't supposed to house patients. I turned the handle. The metal door opened with a reluctant groan. Inside, the whispering grew clearer, not in volume, but in texture. I could make out the differences in the voices, one hoarse, another soft and clipped, one rapid like someone murmuring through clenched teeth. None of them formed coherent words, but all were urgent, frantic, as though trying to speak without drawing attention to themselves. The intercom crackled. Every whisper stopped. A sharp, static pop burst through the room, loud enough to sting my ears. My flashlight flickered violently, and an icy pressure clamped around my lungs. The light stabilized almost immediately, but the intercom did not. From the speaker came a single sound. My name. Spoken in my own voice. Nathaniel. The tone was flat, breathless, identical to my voice recorder, but deeper somehow. Stretched. As if something had peeled my voice out of my throat and flattened it like a specimen slide. I staggered backward, hitting a file cabinet hard enough to send a stack of ruined folders sliding to the floor. My chest tightened so sharply I choked. I tried inhaling, it felt like trying to breathe through wet cloth. The oxygen monitor let out a rapid sequence of warnings, shrill and panicked. Nah, fentanyl. The second time, it came out broken, glitching between pitches that made my skin crawl. I aimed my flashlight at the intercom, expecting, hoping to see an electrical surge, a loose wire, anything rational. Instead, I saw movement in the wire glass reflection. Not behind me. Above me. I whipped the beam upward. Something clung to the ceiling. It was the shape of a person at first glance, limbs elongated, arms braced against the pipes, but the proportions were wrong. The torso was too long, the spine bowed unnaturally, and the head hung low and loose, as though it were suspended by muscle alone. The moment the light hit it, the thing snapped its head toward me. Its eyes, if the dark pits were eyes, widened sharply, catching the reflection of my flashlight like an animal's. I stumbled backward, knocking into the doorframe, but the thing didn't launch. It didn't move at all. It only inhaled. Slowly. Deeply. And every breath it took made the oxygen monitor scream. The sound of the monitor wailing froze me harder than the thing staring down at me. A sharp, shrill alarm meant the oxygen level had dropped fast enough to be life-threatening. I could feel it too, the thinness of the air, the strange weight in my lungs, the way each breath felt stretched and hollow. The creature, if that's what it was, continued inhaling with slow, deliberate precision, as if it were deliberately drawing the breathable air out of the room. Its ribcage expanded like something made of bending wire instead of bone, every movement too smooth, too quiet. I forced myself to step sideways along the wall, keeping my flashlight trained on the ceiling. The beam jittered as my hand shook. The thing didn't crawl, didn't lunge, it simply adjusted its grip on the pipes, its limbs stretching with unnatural flexibility. Its head rotated a few degrees more, the slack neck tightening just long enough to keep the dark pits of its eyes locked on me. I had to get out of that room before my lungs seized completely. The intercom crackled again. Nathaniel. My own voice, identical in pitch but gutted of warmth, echoed from the speaker. This time it sounded closer, not coming from the ceiling, but from behind the metal cabinets beside the door. The creature inhaled again, a long, dragging pull that made my ears pop and my vision blur for a fraction of a second. I didn't wait for a third. I lunged for the door, grabbing the handle with both hands. The cold metal burned my skin. The hinges shrieked as I wrenched it open. As soon as I crossed the threshold, I didn't stop. I kept moving, half running, half staggering down the sloping corridor. The oxygen monitor's alarm dulled to a frantic series of chirps, but at least I could breathe again, even if every gasp felt like needles scraping my throat. Behind me, I heard metal flex. Not a crash. Not a bang. Just a quiet, controlled shift. Like something adjusting its weight. I didn't look back. The corridor seemed longer now than when I entered. The incline was steeper, the dust thicker, and the air had that same waiting quality, dense, aware. My footsteps echoed irregularly, the sound bouncing strangely off the walls. Once or twice, I thought I heard footsteps falling out of sync with mine, as though something were matching my pace a few beats too late. I forced myself to breathe steadily. Panic meant hyperventilation, and hyperventilation meant I'd go down fast in thinning air. The monitor stabilized after several seconds, returning to the baseline reading. I wiped sweat from my forehead and realized my hand was trembling so violently that droplets flicked onto the wall. I reached the maintenance hub with the examination chair again and slowed just long enough to scan the room. The chair hadn't moved. The straps hung limp. The carth warning on the seat, "Don't look at IT," seemed deeper than before, like the metal itself had healed around the letters. But something else had changed. There were two sets of footprints now. The original, straight-line trail leading toward the chair. And a new set, smaller, lighter, leading away from it. They hadn't been there before. The dust around them was still settling, disturbed by my movement, as if whatever made them had passed through only moments ago. A soft sound drifted from the far side of the room. A breath. Short. Sharp. Human. I tightened my hold on the flashlight and took a slow step backward toward the stairwell. My heel brushed the bottom step when the sound came again, but louder, this time unmistakably a gasp, like someone waking from a nightmare. I swung the beam across the floor, cabinets, exposed pipes. The light wasn't strong enough to reach the back corner clearly, but it caught a glimpse of something pale. Skin. A hand. Fingers curled as if bracing against the floor. Someone was lying there. "Hey!" I called, my voice cracking embarrassingly. "If you can hear me, don't move." Movement answered me. Fast. Too fast. Not a crawl. A pull. As if the person grabbed something in the darkness and yanked themselves deeper into the unseen corner. The scrape of nails against concrete echoed in a jagged rhythm. The hand vanished. The breathing stopped. My own pulse hammered so loud I could feel it in my teeth. "Hello?" My voice barely carried. It felt swallowed by the room. No answer. I took one step into the room. The oxygen monitor chirped a warning. I stopped instantly. A low clicking sound, soft, irregular, rose from the shadows. Not footsteps. Not breathing. Something else. A biological clicking, like joints or cartilage shifting in a way that shouldn't make noise. Then, a whisper. Not from the corner. From above. I aimed the flashlight up. The ceiling pipes were empty. The thing I'd seen earlier was gone. I backed toward the stairwell again, breath catching in my throat. The air temperature shifted abruptly, a cold wave flowing across the room like a draft from a door opening. Except no door had moved. The air simply changed direction, as though something large had passed through it. Something that displaced the atmosphere the same way it had drained it. My instinct screamed at me, "Get upstairs, get out, get any distance you can from whatever is moving through this place," but a single, nauseating realization rooted me in place. The footsteps leading away from the chair. They weren't walking toward me. They were walking toward the stairwell. And they stopped exactly where I stood. Another whisper drifted from somewhere behind me. Not my name this time. Just one word. "Hello." A pressure hit my ears, an abrupt pop, like diving underwater, and the corridor lights above me flickered through the dust, casting jerky shadows across the wall. The stairwell felt suddenly wrong, too narrow, too dark, like it led somewhere deeper instead of upward. My equilibrium shifted. The wall seemed to tilt. Hello. Had I heard it right? My flashlight dimmed. For the first time since entering the basement, real fear, cold, animal, primal, dug its nails into my spine. Every instinct, every ounce of training, every warning we'd ever been told about these abandoned facilities hit me at once. Get out. Go. Now. I turned toward the stairs, but the moment I lifted my foot, a new sound rose from deeper in the basement. A door opening. Slowly. Deliberately. Followed by footsteps. Not perfect ones this time. Irregular. Dragging. Unsteady. Coming closer. I didn't wait to see what made them. I bolted up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, gripping the railing so hard the metal cut into my palm. The footsteps below quickened. A scraping sound joined them, metal against concrete. My lungs burned, my chest heaved, and when I reached the top landing, I stumbled onto the ground floor hallway. And froze. Because the door I had entered through earlier, the one that had been cracked open, was now completely closed. And the metal crossbar, the one that had vanished, was welded back into place. I stared at the welded crossbar, my mind tripping over itself, refusing to accept what my eyes were showing me. The metal looked freshly fused, the bead of the weld still rippled and clean, as if someone had done it minutes ago while I was below. No rust. No dust. No tools. No smell of heated steel. Just a perfect, seamless bar locking the door shut. I reached out and touched it. Cold. Impossibly cold. The kind of cold that made my fingertips go numb instantly, like touching dry ice. I snatched my hand back, skin throbbing. My flashlight beam trembled over the metal surface. It wasn't just welded shut, it was wrong. The crossbar didn't look attached to the brackets. It looked grown into them, as if the metal had fused itself back together, organically. Behind me, down the stairwell, something exhaled. The sound was faint yet unmistakably deliberate, with that same drawn-out hollow quality that made the air feel thinner. I turned slowly, the beam of my light cutting through the slanted stairwell darkness. Nothing moved. No shadow shifted. But the oppressive pressure was back, pushing against my chest, urging me down the hallway away from the sealed door. I wasn't getting out that way. I wiped sweat from my face with a shaking hand, forcing myself to think. Hospitals this old usually had multiple basement access points, mechanical rooms, supply shafts, morgue elevators, but most of them would be sealed. I needed a surface-level exit I could reach without going back into the lower levels. The east corridor stretched ahead, dust hanging in the air like suspended ash. I forced my legs to move, each step softer than the last, trying not to make any sound that could echo down the stairwell. The footsteps I'd heard earlier seemed to trail after me in memory, their uneven rhythm haunting every inch of silence. As I rounded the corner, the building seemed changed. The walls looked cleaner, the floor clearer. Places where I remembered debris now had swept arcs, as if someone had dragged a wide tool across the concrete. And the air, still cold, smelled faintly of disinfectant. Not the old sour smell of abandoned medical spaces. Fresh disinfectant. Crisp. Chemical. Recent. I swallowed hard. That wasn't possible. A gentle click echoed ahead. I froze. It came from a doorway slightly cracked open, a sliver of darkness dividing the hall. A warm amber glow pulsed behind it like a tiny generator light or the emergency bulbs hospitals once used for minimal navigation. But the building had no power. There was no reason for any light to be on. I pressed myself to the opposite wall, inching sideways until I could see through the crack. It wasn't a light inside the room. It was a candle. A single candle set atop a metal tray table, burning tall and steady despite the lack of airflow. Its wax was perfectly smooth, untouched by dripping. The flame didn't waver. A shape moved in front of it. My heart lurched into my throat. Someone was sitting in the room. A figure on a low stool, hunched, facing away from the door. Shoulders sloped. Back slightly twisted. Their hands rested on their knees, fingers long and thin, unmoving. They didn't breathe. Not visibly. Not audibly. The candle flame cast a shifting shadow across the wall. And then, the figure spoke. Not loudly. Not abruptly. But in a soft, ragged whisper that dragged itself across the room like torn fabric. You saw it. My skin went hot, then ice cold. The whisper came again. You looked at it. My hands went slick on the flashlight. I didn't want to speak. I didn't want it to know I was there. But remaining silent felt worse, like it might turn around if I didn't respond. What? What is it? My voice thinned out. Barely a sound. The figure's head twitched, not fully turning, just jerking like a loose puppet string pulled too hard. It hears you now. I stepped back instinctively, but the floor betrayed me. The faint squeak of my shoe echoed into the room. The figure went still. Dead still. The candle flame guttered for the first time, flickering sideways as if something had brushed past it. I backed away quietly, pulse ricocheting in my temples. The door creaked louder than it should have as it opened just an inch more. The stool creaked. The figure shifted, rising slightly, its spine unfolding with slow, deliberate motion. I turned and moved fast but silent down the corridor. The beam of my flashlight now seemed too bright, too revealing, lighting every speck of dust like a signal flare. Behind me, the faint scrape of the stool dragged against the floor. I picked up my pace. A hallway sign appeared overhead, service lift access. My heart hammered. A surface elevator meant a possible exit. Many old hospitals had manual override doors that could be forced open even if the elevator itself no longer functioned. I followed the arrow. The hallway narrowed and angled downward, which made no sense. Surface access shouldn't descend. But I didn't have time to rethink. The scraping sound behind me grew clearer, more irregular. Something was following me now, its steps uneven but determined. A soft dragging movement accompanied each footfall. The pressure in the air thickened. My flashlight dimmed again. As I reached the elevator alcove, my stomach dropped. The surface lift doors weren't metal. They were gone. Ripped off the frame entirely. In their place gaped a dark vertical shaft. The interior walls were intact, but the platform was not there, just an empty pit and a steel cable dangling loose into the darkness. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. From behind me, the dragging footsteps stopped. Silence stretched the hallway thin. My breathing turned too loud. Too harsh. My lungs burned. Then, Nathaniel. The whisper slipped through the dark behind me. Not from the figure. Not from the intercom. Not from any human throat. I spun around, flashlight slicing through the stale air. Nothing was there. But the air in front of me compressed, like displacement from a sudden movement. A cold, invisible pressure ghosted past my cheek. Something was close. Too close. My elbow brushed the empty elevator frame. I felt a sudden downward pull, an instinct, a sensation like the floor dropping beneath me, only in my mind. The shaft yawned like a throat. A sound rose from below. Not footsteps. Not breathing. A rhythmic scrape, like metal dragged rhythmically across concrete far down the shaft. As if something were climbing. Upward. Fast. I stumbled back into the hallway just as a hand, longer than it should have been, fingers stretched unnaturally far, reached the opening, gripping the edge of the shaft with silent force. Another hand gripped the other side. And something began to pull itself up. I turned and ran. The corridor lights flickered violently, the air behind me compressing and releasing in sick, rhythmic pulses with every movement of the thing climbing out of the shaft. My flashlight flickered as I sprinted, my lungs screaming, my legs burning, taking turns I didn't recognize, passing hallways that hadn't existed an hour ago. Behind me, claws on concrete. A long inhale. A scraping of bone on metal. It was out of the shaft. And it was following me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to find a room with a lock, a desk to barricade, a window I could crawl through, anything, but the hallways twisted in ways that made no architectural sense. Corners appeared where old floor plans showed straight paths. Doorways gaped open where blank walls should be. My footsteps slapped the concrete in uneven rhythm, each one answered by the thing following me. Its footsteps weren't consistent. Something about its gait was wrong, too long, too stretched, sometimes dragging, sometimes snapping forward with unnatural speed. Every time I turned, it felt a little closer, even though I never saw it fully in the beam of my flashlight. Only fragments. A hand withdrawing around a corner. A joint bending sharper than bone should. The faint reflection of eyes too far apart. I spun left into a side hallway, nearly slipping. My shoulder slammed into a door marked Storage 3B. It burst inward with a rusty clang, and I stumbled into a dark room filled with collapsed shelving units and stacks of metal trays. The air smelled of mildew and old gauze. I slammed the door shut behind me and pressed my weight against it, panting hard. The thin wood flexed against my back. The hallway outside went silent. My pulse hammered loud enough to make the darkness feel tight around me. I didn't dare turn on the flashlight. Not yet. I listened. Nothing. Then, tap, tap, tap. Soft knocks against the metal outside the door. Not frantic. Not angry. Testing. The way a predator tests fencing. I slapped a hand over my mouth, breathing through my nose to muffle the sound. Sweat crawled down my neck. The tapping continued for several seconds, then stopped. I waited, muscles trembling, every nerve on high alert. A slow inhalation seeped through the cracks of the door. It wasn't breathing in air from the hallway. It was breathing me in. My legs almost buckled. The inhale deepened, then drifted away. Footsteps scraped, fading down the corridor. I waited 30 seconds. Then a full minute. Only when the silence thickened again did I risk turning on the flashlight. The beam revealed shelves collapsed like broken skeletons, stacks of rusted surgical basins, dusty bins of old tubing. The back wall held a tall metal cabinet with its doors slightly ajar. Something inside shifted. I jerked the flashlight toward it. Silence. Stillness. I told myself it was settling debris or a rat. But there weren't any rat droppings, no chew marks, no nests. This basement didn't feel inhabited by anything natural. I approached slowly, each step soundless. My fingers brushed the cabinet door and nudged it open. Inside hung a row of patient gowns, blue, stained, brittle with age. One slid forward, like it had been touched from behind. A burst of cold air hit my face. I jumped back and nearly tripped over a fallen tray. The gown swayed slightly, then stilled. Behind the cabinet, a thin seam in the wall caught my attention. A hidden door. A maintenance crawl space. I pulled the cabinet completely aside. Hinges snapped. Dust plumed out in a thick wave. I covered my mouth and peeked through the narrow gap. A concrete passage stretched beyond, low ceiling, lined with exposed wiring and broken conduit. A perfect place for inspection crews, and a perfect place to hide from something taller than a human. I squeezed inside, dragging the cabinet halfway back to obscure the opening. The space was claustrophobic, barely taller than my shoulders. Cables brushed the top of my head. I moved forward in a crouch, flashlight held low. The dust was thicker here, making the air taste metallic. 20 feet in, I paused. The dust on the floor looked disturbed. Not from me. From something else that had passed through recently. Long, thin drag marks. Fingertip trails. Heel-shaped indentations too long to be human. My stomach churned. The thing had used this crawl space. The cable conduit ahead dipped sharply, widening into a junction chamber. As I stepped into it, I saw movement on the far wall, faint reflections of something shifting behind a thin crate. I aimed the flashlight. The crate covered a small rectangular opening. Behind it, something pale withdrew quickly, like a face pulling back, too smooth, too blurred by darkness to make out details. Then a whisper threaded through the vents. "You shouldn't have come." I stumbled backwards into the wall, shoulders scraping concrete. The whisper came again, closer, more breathy. "It wakes when you look." That same second, the metal crate popped outward slightly, bending as if pressured from the other side. Not enough to open. Just enough to test. Footsteps echoed faintly behind me in the crawl space. Not the creature. These sounded like normal footsteps. Human. Slow. Cautious. Coming from the direction I entered. "Hello?" I whispered before I could stop myself. "If someone's there, I'm stuck. Please don't." The footsteps approached. One step. Another. Another. I lifted the flashlight toward the source. A figure stood at the far end of the crawl space. Bent slightly. An old patient gown hanging from its shoulders. Head tilted at a strange angle. Skin gray in the light. But the face. It wasn't right. It was my face. Not alive. Not dead. Eyes clouded. Mouth slack. Jaw bruised as if gripped by something powerful. My knees gave out. I slid back, trembling violently. My breath rasped and hitched. The doppelganger took one jerking step forward, hitting its head on the low ceiling with a soft, wet crack, but it didn't flinch. It reached out a hand, pale, elongated fingers twitching like they were remembering how to move. The vent behind me rattled, metal bending louder. Something on the other side dug into it, claws or bone scraping steel. Trapped. Trapped between two impossible things. No, please. My voice came out a whisper. The doppelganger opened its mouth wide, too wide, jaw hinging with a crack. It exhaled. Cold washed over me. My oxygen monitor shrieked. The vent exploded open behind me as something lunged through the metal. I scrambled sideways, slamming my shoulder into the junction's corner, knocking over a rusted toolbox. My flashlight rolled out of my hand, spinning across the concrete, its beam slicing wild arcs. The doppelganger lunged. The thing behind me lunged. And the crawlspace lights that should not have been on, flickered violently and burst, leaving everything in total darkness. The blackout hit like a punch, leaving me suspended in a void thick with dust and the sound of two things breathing far too close to me. One breath was slow, stretched, cavernously hollow. The other was shallow, ragged, wet. I didn't dare move at first. Any sound I made felt like it would draw them both to me. The doppelganger's unnaturally wheezing inhale rasped inches from my right. The other creature, the one that tore through the vent, shifted on my left, its weight compressing the concrete with soft scraping clicks. I could hear its bones adjusting, its joints sliding into place. My breath turned sharp, uncontrollable, and the oxygen monitor screeched in rapid warning. I clamped a hand over it. Not to silence it, that was impossible, but to drown the noise under my palm, muffling the alert. Both creatures froze at the sound. My heart nearly blew out of my chest. The doppelganger exhaled. The cold wave slapped across my face, seeping into my pores, the chill so sharp it felt like my blood thinned on the spot. My fingers numbed instantly. To my left, something shifted again, a long limb stretching, brushing the low crawlspace ceiling. Nails or claws tapped softly as it adjusted its grip. I could not stay still. I could not move. I was dead either way. Then something cracked under my knee. The rusted toolbox I'd knocked over. Both creatures reacted. I didn't wait to see how. I lunged forward in the pitch black, hands outstretched until my palms hit concrete, then scrambled on elbows and knees, desperate, feral. The crawlspace twisted sharply, my shoulder slammed into a turning junction, skin tearing on a protruding bolt. I didn't stop. I forced myself forward, dragging my body like an animal escaping a snare. Behind me, the sound erupted. A screech. Two screeches. One deep, one twisted. Both angry. They had collided. They weren't just after me, they were aware of each other. Something hit the wall hard enough to send dust and grit raining down. The vent creature hissed, a long static-filled inhale that sounded like air being sucked through hundreds of tiny cracks. The doppelganger answered with a gurgling cry that mimicked my own voice failing. I crawled faster, hands slicing on broken conduit, elbows bruising. Panic lent strength to my limbs. The crawl space narrowed, and I squeezed through a gap barely wider than my chest, ribs grinding against metal. My shirt shredded on screws jutting from the wall. Behind me, a thud shook the entire passage. Something large hit the floor. Then the sound of fast, scraping movement heading my way. I twisted, scuttling into a downward sloping tunnel that hadn't been on any blueprint. The ground dipped steeply, sending me sliding uncontrollably. I clawed at the walls, catching handfuls of frayed wiring and damp insulation, slowing myself just enough not to break a leg. I slid out of the crawl space and spilled into a dark room, crashing onto cold tile. For a moment, everything was silent except my own gasping breaths. I fumbled for the flashlight. It wasn't with me. But there was faint light in this room, sickly green, like a failing exit sign. My eyes adjusted enough to see the broken pieces of the original lighting system mounted overhead, flickering in rhythmic spasms. The room looked like an old pediatric ward. Rows of small beds lined the walls, their metal frames rusted, their mattresses gone. Murals on the walls, the remnants of cartoon animals, peeled in strips like sunburned skin. A wheel-for stand lay on its side near the doorway, its tubing coiled like veins across the floor. A distant scraping came from the crawlspace above. It was getting closer. I staggered to my feet and scanned the room. There were 2 doors, one blocked by debris, the other hanging crooked on broken hinges. I shoved through the second one, spilling into another hallway. But this hallway was clean. Not dusty. Not abandoned. Clean. The tiles gleamed faintly. The overhead strip lights flickered with partial power. And the faint smell of antiseptic hung in the air, fresh, sharp, unmistakable. Someone had been here recently. Footsteps echoed distantly. Soft. Controlled. Human? I pressed to the wall, listening. The footsteps stopped at the far end of the corridor. A figure stepped into sight, a silhouette illuminated by the flickering greenish light. Tall. Wearing a long lab coat. Their posture was stiff, too stiff, their heads slightly tilted. They stood motionless for several seconds, then raised one arm slowly and pointed directly at me. My skin crawled. I whispered, "Please, no." The figure jerked, like the motion had been too sharp for its joints. Then it lifted its other arm and motioned. A beckoning gesture. As if telling me to come. I backed away. The figure mirrored me, stepping forward, head tilting further, body stuttering like a skipping frame of video. "Stay back," I whispered. "Please." It took another step, faster this time. And its foot failed to make sound. No shoe impact. No heel. Nothing. A hologram? A hallucination? No, its shadow hit the floor in flickering distortion. I bolted down the hallway. Behind me, the figure moved too. Smooth at first. Then abruptly fast. Its steps pattering too many times per second. Like it wasn't using its joints properly. The corridor twisted and I nearly slammed into a rolling curtain rack. I shoved it aside and sprinted through a pair of swinging doors into another wing of the hospital. This wing was mid-collapse, ceiling tiles on the floor, broken monitors, overturned crash carts. The sterile smell vanished, replaced with the thick, raw heavy odor I expected from a place abandoned for decades. How could one hallway be clean and another decayed? It didn't matter. I kept running. The footsteps. The too fast, too many footsteps. Followed. I burst into a wide room, a former cafeteria, tables overturned, old chairs scattered. Light streamed faintly through filthy high windows, casting everything in a dull gray. I darted behind a counter, crouching low. Footsteps entered the room. Slow now. Careful. Listening. Then the lab coat figure stepped into view between the tables. Its neck was bent so far sideways the head nearly touched its shoulder. It scanned the room with jerking motions. My lungs burned with the effort of holding breath. The figure inhaled. Not like a human. It inhaled like the thing in the ceiling. A hollow, cavernous pole. An oxygen-draining void. My oxygen monitor started chirping. The figure's head snapped toward the sound. Its body contorted, limbs bending at impossible angles, joints cracking like breaking sticks as it twisted to face my hiding spot. I ran. The figure shrieked. Not a human scream, but a multi-tonal wail, layered with static, and my own voice, echoing inside it. Chairs flew aside as I sprinted for the emergency exit door at the far end of the cafeteria. The bar handle stuck for a terrifying second, then gave way, and I crashed into a stairwell. Only to freeze. It was not a stairwell. It was the basement. Again. The walls were the same. The pipes were the same. The same law thrummed through the air. Impossible. I had run upward. I had run across an entire wing. But the door led me back underground. Behind me, the creature shrieked. And something began descending the stairwell that no longer existed. I stumbled backward into the basement corridor, hitting the wall hard enough to knock dust loose from the pipes above. The emergency door swung shut behind me with a clang that echoed endlessly through the concrete throat of the building. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I pushed myself upright. Every instinct told me this was impossible, that no architecture could loop like this, that no building could reshape its own layout, but the familiar maintenance hub was unmistakable. The examination chair sat exactly where it had been. Except now it was facing me. I hadn't heard it move. I hadn't seen it shift. But its metal body was angled perfectly toward the door, straps hanging like limp veins, the carved warning glinting faintly in my flashlight beam. Don't look at it. The noise behind the door, behind the reality that should have been the cafeteria, grew faint. Too faint. As if the creature chasing me no longer stood on the other side. As if it had never been there. The basement air thickened. Then a soft, wet thud sounded on the ceiling above me. Followed by another. Then another. Slow, deliberate steps crawling across the concrete overhead. I backed down the corridor, pulse slamming against my ribs. The ceiling creaked under shifting weight. Dust rained down. Pipes vibrated like tense strings being plucked by unseen fingers. I fought the rising urge to look up. My chest seized with each breath. Don't look at it. The phrase dug into my mind like a hook. Not a warning carved by someone fleeing. A rule. A survival rule. The kind people leave behind when they know they're not making it out. The overhead footsteps stopped. Silence stretched thin. Then, click. A tiny sound. Too tiny. Like a camera shutter. I froze. The lights flickered. The oxygen monitor pinged once, just a single, questioning chirp, and I felt the air around me tighten. Not vanish, not drain, but compress. Like something enormous had inhaled without breathing. And then, in a quiet voice I recognized too intimately, the same voice the intercom had mimicked. Nathaniel. My body jolted so fast I slammed into the opposite wall, pain flashing through my shoulder. My name hung in the air like frost. But it wasn't behind me. It wasn't ahead of me. It was above me. Something leaned over the edge of the ceiling, just slightly, just enough that its shadow stretched long down the corridor. My flashlight flickered violently, catching glimpses of elongated fingers curled around a pipe, skin stretched thin over too many joints. I ducked and ran. The footsteps above gave chase, moving faster now, scraping, thudding, cracking across the ceiling panels as if the creature barely weighed anything at all. The sound followed me perfectly, staying just overhead no matter how sharply I turned. Left. Right. Past the supply closet. Past the collapsed shelving. Every inch I ran, it matched. It wanted me to hear it. Wanted me to know exactly where it was. The corridor ahead dipped again, deeper than before, the incline steeper, impossible. I forced my legs to keep going, even as panic twisted in my lungs. A doorway appeared on my left, one I hadn't seen before, marked by peeling blue tape across the top. Lab cold storage. I skidded inside. Rows of broken refrigeration units lined the walls. Metal tables were overturned, some covered in blankets decayed to brittle dust. I ducked behind a fallen cabinet just as something slammed into the hallway door hard enough to dent the metal. The thing was no longer crawling. It was descending. Slowly. Purposefully. I held my breath. A long, dragging inhale seeped through the door, bending the lingering cold air around me. Frost appeared on the frame, spiderwebbing across the metal. My breath fogged instantly, curling upward like steam. The handle twitched. I pressed myself flatter behind the cabinet, feeling its sharp edge digging into my hip. The handle twitched again. Then it lowered. And the door swung inward an inch. Not pushed. Pulled. A hand too long, too pale, curled around the frame. A second hand followed, gripping the metal and bending it like soft clay. The creature's head emerged into the doorway. I bit down on a cry so hard my teeth ached. Its face, if I could call it that, was stretched in ways a skull shouldn't stretch. Skin taut, thin, translucent. No nose. A mouth that hung open as if the muscles had forgotten how to close. Dark pits where I should have been. It inhaled again. The refrigeration units rattled violently. The air turned razor-edge thin. I flailed blindly, crawling backward, bumping into something soft. My hand landed on a rolled sheet of thick plastic, an old insulated curtain. An idea flickered through my panic. If it hunted by air displacement, by oxygen, by breath, maybe I could mask mine. I wrapped the curtain around my head and torso, sealing it as tightly as my trembling hands allowed. The plastic slid over my mouth, making each inhale muffled and damp. I tucked my arms against my chest. Just as the creature entered the room, its body moved like a puppet pulled by mismatched strings, jerking, tilting, limbs contorting at angles that made its joints crack. It lowered itself to the floor in a slow, smooth drop and sniffed the air. No, inhaled the air. The entire room groaned as the pressure shifted violently, cold oxygen rushing toward the creature like wind into a vacuum. Frost crept across the floor. My vision spotted. The oxygen monitor trapped under the curtain warbled weakly, struggling. The creature crawled closer. Fingers dragged along the tiles in slow testing arcs. It stopped directly in front of the cabinet. I squeezed my eyes shut. The creature's head lowered, hovering inches from the curtain-wrapped shape of my body. Its mouth expanded wider, the thin membrane of skin stretching like wet paper. A sound came from its throat, a searching, confused hum, as if the creature couldn't detect me through the plastic. It exhaled. The plastic shivered violently. I stayed perfectly still. My lungs screamed. My spine trembled. My mouth filled with coppery heat. The creature hovered a long, agonizing moment. Then, a sharp clang echoed down the hall. Not a metallic fall. A voice. A human voice. Far away, faint, terrified. Hello? Is someone here? The creature's head snapped upward so fast its neck cracked. It inhaled a massive, violent pull. Then it darted out of the room with impossible speed. I tore the curtain off, gasping so hard my ribs hurt. The oxygen monitor screeched in alarm. I staggered to my feet, gripping the wall. Someone else was down here. Someone alive. And the creature had gone after them. I forced myself into the hallway, lungs still spasming, and followed the echoes of distant screaming. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't even have a flashlight. But I couldn't let someone else survive this hell alone. I turned a corner and froze. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway. Not the creature. A man. Mid-30s. Disheveled. Terrified. His eyes locked onto mine. You're real, he whispered hoarsely. Oh, thank God, you are. Something yanked him upward into the ceiling so fast his cry cut off instantly. His legs disappeared last. And then there was blood. For a full second, my mind rejected what I'd seen. The man didn't just get pulled, he vanished upward, snatched into a space no wider than a ventilation gap. His scream barely started before it ended, swallowed whole by whatever waited in the dark above him. A thick splatter hit the tiles with a wet smack. Droplets ran down the wall, tracing thin red trails. I stumbled backward, my spine hitting the corner so hard I saw a burst of white. My throat tightened, as if the air itself had gone solid around it. The creature didn't reappear. It didn't descend. It simply melted back into the architecture, leaving behind only silence and the faintest echo of the man's final, choked breath. I forced my shaking legs to move. Staying still was death. Moving was maybe death, but at least it was something. My flashlight was gone, but a thin trail of emergency lights flickered along the baseboards, casting just enough greenish glow to navigate. My vision swam. Each breath scraped inside my lungs like I was inhaling powdered glass. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from here. But the hospital had other plans. Every time I turned into a hallway, it wasn't the one I'd left moments before. The floor sloped unpredictably, sometimes sharply enough that I had to grab a railing to keep from sliding. Doors I tried were welded, fused, or missing entirely. The air tasted metallic and stale, like the inside of an unused oxygen tank. Behind me, the building's bones creaked. Not from age. From weight. From something moving through the ceilings and walls. A soft thud landed in the corridor ahead of me. Dust drifted lazily from the pipes above. I froze. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like a pressure in my ears. Then, knock. Not on a door. On the air. A hollow, popping pulse, like a bubble bursting underwater. My oxygen monitor beeped once, then twice, then erupted into a screaming alarm. The air pressure plummeted so fast my vision sparkled and my knees buckled. It was here. I spun, blindly searching for any escape. A side corridor branched off to the left. I sprinted down it, lungs burning, body screaming. The floor dipped again, plunging deeper underground. The hallway narrowed until it felt like the walls were moving in with me, squeezing breath out of my body. A soft whisper drifted behind me. Down. The words slithered across my spine. I picked up speed, nearly falling as the incline steepened. The walls vibrated with something massive shifting nearby, crawling through conduits too small for anything living. Something brushed my shoulder, a faint exhale of air displacement, like fingers made of cold vapor. I shoved myself harder down the hallway until it spat me into a larger room. A morgue. Stainless steel tables lined the center. Body lockers on the back wall were rusted shut, some half open like gaping mouths. A sheet lay crumpled on the nearest table. Not yellowed with age, fresh white. A recently wheeled cart sat beside it, its wheels clean of dust. Someone had been down here today. Or something had used it. A shadow passed over the far wall. I ducked behind the nearest table, biting down on a cry. My own heartbeat sounded like thunder. A soft sliding noise echoed, metal drawers shifting, hinges whining quietly. I peeked through the table legs. The morgue cabinet at the far left trembled. The drawer jerked open 3 inches. Stopped. Jerked again. Stopped. Something inside was pushing from the wrong angle, as if it weren't lying flat, but pressed against the top of the chamber, limbs contorted. A quiet moan seeped out, muffled by metal. Human. I stood before thinking, driven purely by instinct. I reached the drawer and yanked hard on the handle. It slid open only halfway before catching on something wet and heavy. A hand fell out. Gray skin. Long fingers. No nails. The wrist bent at a sick angle, bone visible beneath stretched flesh. Not human. The moan shifted pitch, turning into a wet, warped imitation of a cry. The body in the drawer twitched violently. Something inside the torso shifted, like a second set of limbs pressing outward. I shoved the drawer closed, nearly retching. Footsteps clicked behind me. Slow. Measured. They didn't belong to a contorted creature. They belonged to someone who walked like a person. I turned. A woman stood in the doorway. A nurse uniform from the 1980s clung to her frame, faded blue, torn at the sleeves, dried blood streaked across the hem. Her hair hung in damp ropes around an expressionless face. Her eyes were blank white. Her chest didn't rise or fall. She lifted one hand, pointed at me. Then she whispered, in a voice that sounded layered underwater. "You're not supposed to be here." I staggered back, hitting the table behind me. I don't want to be here." She took a step forward. Her feet didn't make a sound. Her body glided more than walked. Her head tilted too far left, vertebrae popping faintly. "It's awake now," she rasped. "It smells you." My skin went ice cold. "What is it?" She didn't answer. Her head snapped backward abruptly, her throat stretching open without tearing. A hollow, air-sucking roar poured out of her as if her body were only a speaker for the thing hunting me. The air pressure collapsed again. My knees buckled. Dizziness surged, blackening the edges of my vision. Behind her, the ceiling bulged. Split. The creature dropped through. Its limbs unfolded long and spidery. Its head dangled on loose muscle. Its chest expanded like a bellows. When it inhaled, every steel table in the morgue vibrated. The nurse's body collapsed sideways like a puppet with cut strings. The creature crawled toward me. Fast. I dove under the nearest table and rolled to the other side, sprinting toward the emergency freezer at the back wall. Its giant insulated door was half off its hinge. I squeezed through. The cold hit me like a slap, but the airtight design of the room gave me one chance, one desperate gamble. Creatures that tracked by oxygen displacement might lose me in here. I pulled the heavy door closed behind me as quietly as I could. Darkness swallowed the room. I crouched in the freezing blackness, arms wrapped around myself, breath shallow to conserve oxygen. The creature's footsteps, if I could call them that, scraped outside, slow, uncertain. It sniffed. Inhaled. Scraped the floor again. The handle rattled. I clamped a hand over my mouth. The creature exhaled once. Hard. The door didn't move. It couldn't. The airtight seal held. The sound of its breathing drifted away, back down the hallway, toward new prey, new movement, anything else alive in this impossible maze. I stayed frozen for minutes that felt like hours, teeth chattering, muscles stiffening. When I finally pushed the door open, the morgue was empty. The nurse's body was gone. The creature's trail was gone. Even the blood on the walls had smeared itself into unrecognizable stains. I stumbled into the corridor. Somewhere above, faintly, like a memory carried through air vents, I heard movement. Human. Pleading. A voice in agony. Not mine. Not the man who died. Someone else. Still alive. Still trapped. I ran toward the sound, not for safety. Not for answers. But because no one should die down here alone. Not in Briarwood Memorial Hospital. Not in the basement that shouldn't exist. And not in the dark with the thing that learns your voice, your breath, and your name. Not the thing that is still haunting me. Not the thing that is getting closer again even as I write this. Something rattles the pipes above me. It's here. I can't.